All right. Hello, everyone. It is Tuesday night, and tonight I am excited to introduce you to my friend Tari Faris. Now, Tari writes contemporary romance for Revell, and she has been writing for about 12 years before she got her first contract and writes from Arizona, but her books are set in Michigan. So I think you're going to really enjoy getting to meet her tonight because she writes really wonderful contemporary romance that is just sweet and full of these great characters and setting. And so, Tari, would you like to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Yes, like you said, my name's Tari Faris, and I grew up in Michigan, and I vacation every summer in Michigan. So people always ask me why if I live in Arizona, why do you set your books in Michigan? Part of it's because I miss Michigan, and I really wish I could move back there. So I kind of escape into my fiction, and so yeah, I will escape every summer. I get escape every summer in real life, but I also escape in my books. And so I have been living in Arizona though for 17 years. I have 3 kids. They keep me busy, teenagers now. And I've been married for almost 19 years. And so what questions do you have for me, Cara?
Yeah.
Cara, I'm sorry. Yeah.
How do you find time to write? Because when you've got teenagers at home, that is actually, I think, a busier time than when you have lots of little kids. So how do you balance writing, family, kids, and just life?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of funny because I used to homeschool. My kids were little, and then I shifted for them to school. People would say, "Oh, you probably have so much more time writing now." And I was like, I actually got more writing done when they were homeschooling because I would always be so careful with my schedule and be like, this time I have to write because I had to, but once they went to school, it was so easy to be like, well, I'll just sit down and little work. Oh, I'll sit down and do this. Oh, I'll check Facebook. I'll do this. And then you're like, oh, it's time to pick up the kids and I didn't get anything done. And then again, as our teenagers, the evenings are just shot half the time because you're running them here and there. And then one of them wants to sit down and have a conversation with you. And you never want to pass that up because
Exactly.
And so they're like, hey, mom, I'll play games. And you're like, yes, because you're never going to, you're going to move out of the house in a year. So yeah, I have to be very specific about during my daytime. I try to schedule time in the morning, and I actually write in my closet. I know that always sounds funny to people because I have this desk set up now and I love this, but I also work for my book therapy. And if I sit down at my desk, I get so distracted with work and messages and emails from, readers and all these things. So I take my laptop and then we have a chair that we moved into our closet during COVID when my husband and I were sharing a same space for office just to have some quiet space. But in there, all I have is my laptop and no sticky notes, I don't pull up email, I don't pull up anything, and I just write so that it keeps me from getting distracted by the busyness of the day. A lot of times will say, okay, I'm going to spend this many hours in here before I can move on to something else. Otherwise, I just won't get anything done.
That's so funny. And it's kind of neat to hear how you've had to create a space where you're like, okay, my brain knows that this is where I'm going to write. This is the space where writing occurs and nothing else can. And for me, there were seasons where that actually was going to Panera, or, sometimes I just had to get that little oomph to get going again. And it would be like, okay, I just have to change my location. So, and I totally relate to teenagers and when they want to talk. And usually like my prime writing time has usually been that 8:30, 9 o'clock at night to midnight. And once you have teenagers, that's when they want to talk. They kind of come alive at 11 o'clock after, grunting or answering yes and no. And then all of a sudden they're like, hey, mom, now let's talk. And I had to kind of train myself to go, okay, I need to capture this time because it's not going to be very long and they're going to have moved out. And so kind of being able to embrace those seasons and be like, this is okay, this is good, can actually be kind of challenging. So as you were kind of moving into writing for publication, how did you signal to your family that, okay, this is actually a job now, mom's getting paid for this and she needs her space to be able to create these stories and meet deadlines?
They were older by that point. So I think they gotten used to me writing and setting aside time over the years. And so I just got to where I would say I'm on work time right now. And actually, like I said, I work for my book therapy, but it's just 10 hours a week. And I would often say to my husband, or my kids, I have to work tonight. And I realized though, that my husband was like, I thought you only worked 10 hours a week. And I realized I wasn't in his mind designating between writing work. And I'm like, okay, I am, but this is for different, sometimes it's that, sometimes it's this, but if it's work, I mean, it's not just playing. Because sometimes I know my kids will see me and like one time they'll be like, you're on your phone, Mom, you're just playing. And I'm like, I'm responding to emails. But, like when I send out a newsletter, I like to always try to respond to my, anybody who emails me. So then I'm trying to respond back to, I'm like, it is, but it's work, honey. I'm not playing Candy Crush. Okay. I'm trying to respond, engage, and things like that too. So it's just trying to communicate that is, yeah.
So tell us about this book. Just arrived in my mailbox today. It's coming out on September 7th. And
yes,
I got to tell you, I've already started reading it and really already enjoying it. I can tell there's going to be lots of this great conflict, and it's a charming town in Michigan. So how did you come up with the idea for this series of books?
When I first went to a writer's retreat with Susan May Warren, she was telling us, when you first start writing, you start with what you know. So start to make a list of everything you know. So I was like, well, I know Michigan, I know small towns, because that's what I grew up in. I grew up in a small town in Michigan. And I was like, and I know, I go up to where doesn't occur in Ludington, but it happens just south of Ludington. And I do go there every year for the 4th of July. And so I just started making a list. And so I kind of took that with also, for example, if I could redesign my small town that I grew up in, I remember having this conversation with my sisters, and we were always saying, one thing that our town, we really wish had a kind of that center of town, because we kind of do, but there's a college there. So you're not going to go hang out at the college if you're a community person. And so anyway, we were discussing that. So I kind of started developing this ideal town, kind of the influence of Gilmore Girls, probably has a little influence of Heart of Dixie in there, has a little influence of, just my small town growing up, that idea of, and so I wrote the very first book where it was just Hannah and Luke's story. Now all the main novels also have a subplot that runs through them. But the first time I wrote Hannah and Luke's story, which is You Belong With Me, it was just Hannah and Luke's story. And Hannah was very different. Her goals were all different. But I just fell in love with the town. And the more, of course, the first time I wrote that, it just started to come alive. I started seeing the old houses and all the people, and kept having, I want to do this. Oh, I've got, people would just drop into the story, and then I'd be like, I got to make them a character. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's an interesting character. I can't wait to tell their story. Even the subplot of Since You've Been Gone is a character that we meet in the first book. Her name's Madison, and nobody likes her in the first book. And in fact, several of my avid readers were like, I can't believe you are going to bring Madison back as a subplot. I hate her. I'm like, I know. And they're like,
she's going to be so much fun to write because everybody hates her.
Right. And so, and if you look up saying, you can't really like her. And I was like, okay. I'm like, I said, I just have to tell her story. And all those people have been like, oh my word, I love her. Like, I think she might be my favorite person in that book. And I did. There's something about when I started writing her in the first story, I just felt like there's so much more to her. And I just love being able to bring her back. And I like the fact that it deals with a lot of that small town conflict, where I grew up in a small town. And so you do know everybody's business. You do know, I was home visiting, and again, my small town, and I ran into a friend who's moved to town. So she didn't grow up in this town, but she lives there now, and I grew up there. But we had met anyway. And anyway, she was like, I just found out that you dated so-and-so, in high school. And I was like, yeah. And I'm like, it's just so funny to me because that's a very small town. Like, people just don't forget anything in a small town where, now that I'm in the city, nobody knows anybody's business, or, and that's one thing. This one specifically, since you've been gone, is really just dealing with past perceptions, past.
And it's such a pretty cover.
It is. I do. I adore them. And so dealing with past perceptions and, people, and I feel like that's such an aspect of a small town. So that I grew up with, that I always dealt with. So, yeah.
Yeah. And it is true. And when you're in a small town and you've lived there your whole life and your families live there, everybody knows everybody. It's funny listening to my grandma and my aunt and my mom talk, because they'll go through like everybody who's lived in the town in Nebraska where my mom grew up. They'll talk about everybody going back like 4 generations. And I'm like, yeah, no, I don't have that experience, because we just moved every like 3 or 4 years. And now I wonder if my kids are going to feel that way about where we've lived here in Indiana. So how did you get started writing? Your biography says that you're actually dyslexic. And so I think most people would think if you struggle with reading, the last thing you would want to do is write. So how did that dream come to life for you?
Yeah, I always say that God was very sneaky. If he had showed me the plan up front, I probably would have gone the other direction. When I graduated from high school, I had read a handful of books. I mastered the ability to do the work without actually reading the material. And I got decent grades, so nobody ever caught on. And it wasn't just that. I also grew up in a generation that if you get good grades, especially like they'd always just say, well, you're not that great at reading and you're terrible at spelling, but you're good at math and science, so it doesn't matter. Like you have something you can focus on in life, so don't worry about it. You get good grades and you're good at math and science. That's just your thing. You're just not good at reading. And I was just kind of took that on, like, okay, that's just part of who I am. Well, I wasn't actually, first how I ended up starting to get into reading was when I was pregnant with my oldest child. I was put on bed rest for part of the pregnancy. And this was before you could take your internet to bed with you. This was back when we had dial-up was a big thing. So there's no way, like if you have to lay in bed, there's nothing to do. And so I went to my husband, got me a bunch of books from the library. And the biggest thing for me with reading, it always made me super tired. Like the words would start to move around after a while on the page, and I would just get super tired. I remember the first time I read a trade length novel, I think it was about college. It took me about a month to get through it. Just a regular book that's about, that length, because I would fall asleep. I would read, a few pages, and they would just make me super tired and I'd fall asleep. And so, but when you're on bed rest, it doesn't really matter if you fall asleep, right? It's just something to do. And then, hey, I fell asleep, who cares? And then you wake up and you read a little more. And so it actually strengthened my eyes without me realizing it. And so then really by the end, I had really fallen. And then even after I was no longer on bed rest, I was a stay-at-home mom. And I'd been in education because I had gone to graduate school. So for 4 years of seminary graduate school. So also went from going and having jobs and studying for years to stay-at-home mom in a strange city. So there was like, what do I do with my time?
Yeah.
And my husband's gone.
Yeah.
And so I just had this baby, and we only had one car because we were poor. We couldn't afford another car. So I couldn't really go anywhere when he was gone all day. And so, and I was just probably lonely. So I was just kept reading, like it'll entertain me. I'll just keep reading. And my husband was always laughing because I was like, it's amazing. It's like a movie in every book, and the library's full of them. And he's like, yes, welcome to being a reader, honey. We all welcome you. And I'm like, oh, this is what the big deal is.
This is why everybody talks about how wonderful books are. And there's
that's right. So many. There's so many to choose from. And so, then one night I had read everything in the house, and I think my baby, again, the same baby, Zachary, my oldest, he was crawling, and he just wasn't in the mood to sleep. There wasn't anything on TV because you couldn't just watch whatever you wanted because it wasn't live streaming, like it was either on or it wasn't. And I couldn't download a book. I always say if I was in the modern age, I would have never become a writer, because all these things nowadays, I'm like, I would have just binge watched a show, or I would have downloaded another book from the library on my Kindle, but I couldn't. And so I sat down to start writing a story that I had in my mind, because the reality is I had been making up stories for years in my mind, because I always loved living in my mind, but I didn't ever think to write those down. And so I started writing it down. And of course, the first one was terrible. I had no idea what I was doing. I wrote myself into a corner. But I kind of was like, so fun to me to watch my characters come alive in my mind. Like they were making decisions that I hadn't planned on them making. And that was just such a foreign concept to me that I felt like I was just watching it play out in my mind and writing down what I was seeing versus making it up. And so then I grabbed for that book because I wrote myself into a corner, and then I started writing a second book. And that one I finished and thought, now I've written a novel, I can get this published. And so then I went.
That's not how it works. It's much more complicated than that for most people. So how did you stick with it? Because it's a process. And often people start a book, they'll think they may finish it and be like, okay, now all I have to do is get it published. And then they realize there's a lot more to this, and it can be very disheartening, and people stop there. So what kind of kept you going to push through? Was it finding Susan May Warren's teaching? Was it ACFW? I mean, what was it that kind of was that impetus to stick with it?
Yeah, I submitted to an agent, actually, because I read that I needed an agent. So I actually submitted to Steve Lobby simply because he was here in the Phoenix area. And I thought, I don't know, maybe you're supposed to be near your agent. I didn't know anything. So I said, okay. Well, he actually was kind enough to give me a very kind response saying, you have a good voice. But you need to learn how to write, basically. He said it a lot nicer than that, but you just basically need to know what you're doing. So he said, I recommend you check out ACFW and Susan May Warren. And so it was my book therapy. So I looked at ACFW, and Susie was teaching that year at ACFW. I was like, boom, I can get both of them in one stop, and then I'll be ready, And I remember I was sitting down in my very first class. It wasn't actually one of Susie's classes, just a very basic writing structure class. And I was like staring at him, and the person sitting next to me was like, what's wrong? You have a very funny look on your face. And I was like, I don't think I know how to write a book. I think I just wrote that one all wrong, because I don't think I have most of those things. And so then I did have a chance. What?
I was going to say, what's interesting is when I started writing officially, it kind of came easy, but it's because I'd been reading voraciously. So I just I had that voice and that structure I'd absorbed. So I could tell, oh, I'm writing myself into a corner. I've got to do something. Or, oh, this isn't going to work. As a reader, I wouldn't like it. But you didn't necessarily have that, that backlog of reading thousands of books to go, this works, that doesn't work. So that would be kind of disorienting to sit in a class like that and be like, oh, because I can still remember going to my first chapter meeting with ACFW, and they're talking about POV. And I'm like, PO what? I don't have any clue what you're talking about.
Yes. I also realized my first book, they had a lot of internal goals, but there was no strong external goal. Like they were just living their life, and things would happen that would prevent their internal goals. But there was things would get in their way, and there was conflict, and there was a lot of relational conflict, but there was nothing like, well, how do you know when they'll reach their goal? Because what are they doing? They're just living their life. We're just watching them live their life. And that was the things I realized I didn't have. Like, oh, I need an actual quest that they're on, a journey. Like, what are they trying to accomplish? And so things like that. It was, and then I sat down with Susie, and she was like, well, so she recommended, some of her books, and then I went to several of her retreats, and it just kind of took off from there. And then really, once I had an understanding of the big pieces, there's still, obviously, I'm continually learning, but once I had the big pieces, it was amazing how things just kind of started to fit together for the next, that's when I started writing You Belong With Me, which of course I ended up having to rewrite 7 times because I was learning still, but yeah.
So what should people expect when they pick up a Tari Faris book? How would you describe it? What makes your books yours? And kind of where do you fit so that they know, oh, I want to read contemporary romance. Now I'm in the mood for a Tari Faris book.
I would say some people will say my writing's funny. I don't think my writing's funny. I think occasionally my characters are funny because they're just honest, but they're not, again, I don't feel like I'm trying to make them funny. I don't feel like it has like comedic things in it. They just, people generally are funny. And so there are moments like that, but I also try to always not shy away from some of the hard questions without hopefully my goal is never to feel like I'm addressing hard questions, where these are just real people. And that's why I've had several reviews that are always my favorite reviews, that they say they just feel like they're watching real people deal with real life, and it walks through them with it, and in the first book, You Belong With Me, they really just, they're really wrestling. What's it mean to belong? He aged out of foster care. What does it mean to belong? And where do you find your identity? Well, yeah, that aspect of it, that you're belonging. Where the second one is kind of the telling of the prodigal son story after the prodigal son story, in the sense that the subplot is Nate, the pastor, who was at one point in his life the prodigal son, and the older brother is very much the older brother of that story, just dealing with forgiveness and dealing with a lot of questions both of them have wrestling with those issues of forgiving somebody who just doesn't deserve it. I mean, that's the reality, is that we don't deserve forgiveness, because if somebody ever deserves forgiveness, you're not really forgiving them. Because nobody deserves forgiveness. That's the whole point. And then Since You've Been Gone really deals with really, God's calling on your life. What is God's plan for your life? And like, how do you wrestle that out? And what if you've made mistakes? Or what if you've done this? Can you, because Leah, the main character in the prequel novella, P.S. Goodbye, which actually you can get free on my website. If you read ebooks, it's free on my website. You can just download that. But she actually leaves in the end of that book, makes some decisions, but she regrets some of those decisions by this book. So she comes back, and it's this whole idea of wrestling out some of these. Did I make a mistake? Did I make, if I could go back and do it differently, I might. So does that mean I made a mistake? Was I not listening to God? Am I not listening to God now? And because I think we deal with a lot of these, and these are all things that I think I've dealt with. And I think that's why I kind of wrestled them out in my characters, because they're not easy questions to answer. And I hopefully just don't pick an easy answer for them. Something they just have to work through. So hopefully I would say my books are fun, contemporary, but also deal with real issues.
So kind of that, not as heavy as women's fiction, but still have more than just a sweet romance where everything's going along and somehow you have to wonder how the hero and heroine are going to get together. And I can say that from the first chapter of this one, you've definitely set up some interesting backstory between the characters, and just, I can tell there's so much that's going to be going on. And so this book releases on September 7th.
Yes.
So there's still a pre-order special going right now. But at the same time, if you haven't tried Tari's writing yet, then definitely pop over to her website and download the novella so you can try it. And I always love doing that because it's a great way just to get a sense for the author and their voice, and if it's something that you're going to enjoy. So our time's up. Thank you so much for
goodness, already.
Yeah, I tell you, it always is so much fun and goes so quickly. Yes. But thank you so much for joining us tonight, Tari.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a joy to talk to you.